7:02. We've just got word that Ginger is just going to be a few minutes late. So the meeting's called to order at 7:02. Proof of quorum, even with three, we have a proof of quorum, so quorum is established. And again, we do expect Ginger, and I haven't heard from Mark. In terms of this special meeting, this is not a regular business meeting. We agreed last time that we would, between the regular meetings, meet for special purposes, specifically for this major projects discussion. So in terms of procedure for this meeting, we're only going to be entertaining, even during the open forum, going to restrict it just to the window patio facade replacement project. All right, that being said, I think one of the things I hope to get out of this meeting is there's been a lot of communication in various channels, and part of it is just to bring that all together so that the board is all working with the same set of information and any additional comments we want to make upon those things. There are some specific questions regarding the procurement that we need to organize ourselves around, discussion about this policy resolution that I talked about last time, and then also the funding conversation that Hillary Lape from Legman Norman put together a PowerPoint slide, and we can talk about some of the things that are on that. So let me begin, and then I'll yield to people who've had other conversations. My conversations on this subject since the last meeting 2 weeks ago have included the following, and I'll go in reverse order. Today, I happened to get a courtesy call from I guess a new vice president at Legaman Norman. His name is John Williams. Is John on the line?
Yes, he is.
I just want to say hello, John. It was good to speak with you earlier today, and welcome to our community. And John and I, among other things, of course, we just talked about just the state of affairs, and it was really the principal reason was just to call and make acquaintance. But of course, we got to talking about large priorities for the building, and this was one of the things that came up. And so I thanked him for Hillary's presentation, and we'll get more on that later. And again, John, if I misconstrue your words from our conversation, please feel free to jump in and correct me. But we talked, John and I, a little bit about financing. So to kind of put the cart before the horse, because this is the conversation that took place today. I think, at least from my perspective, I have not talked with any of our experts yet who have suggested not doing a loan. I realize it's still an open question for this board, but I believe that, again, John, if I'm misconstruing, let me know. John's and my conversation centered on, special assessments versus loans, effectuating those things. And John was indicating to me that, if he were the community manager and he were advising, he would advise us to get a loan on at least part of the amount that we need to finance. And so that, just want to put that in there. I also spoke, and that's for two reasons. One is that, and I'll defer to those who are in real estate to if there's a new view on this, but the view that John and I talked about were twofold. One, hardship. There's a lot of people in this building that are on Social Security, for whom their unit is not just their most important investment, but their only investment. And to ask people to come up with $5,000, $10,000, or $15,000 could cause people to have to leave the building and to leave it in a hurry. And the second part of, again, and I own this part of it, I'm not speaking for John, it's just that, what it will look like to a potential buyer. And I would yield to the people who do real estate to speak more fully on that, whether it's Valerie on the board or Barbara or whoever else might be in that field. I can certainly say that in the course of that conversation, I called my wife later on in the day, and we kind of looked back, and we weren't particularly savvy buyers when we came here in 2019. But now that we are more savvy now in 2025, I can tell you that if I were shopping for a condo, I wouldn't consider one that had a recent special assessment of the size that we're contemplating. But again, that's just my individual point of view. The other conversation I had, and then we'll go on to other sources of information. I talked with Kristen Buck, who's our attorney. I talked with her on Friday last for about 45 minutes as I was at the airport. You know, what I learned from that meeting was even more illustrative, and let me tell you why. Last time we met a couple of weeks ago, I started the conversation about this policy resolution 80 thinking maybe we should just scrap it. Right? Let's just, go back to the way it was before and people cost share and, those sorts of things. And that was kind of my initial thought. Kristen was very, very firm, and I cannot stress how firm she was, that in her legal opinion, it is completely and totally unacceptable to either ask or require any owner of a unit to cost share any part of the windows. She said to the extent that it was ever done informally, that she can't endorse it as a policy going forward. And the reason for that is pretty simple. And I thought about how to express this, which is I own your windows and you own mine. I think that's probably the easiest way to say it. And so how could I, for example, be expected to pay for or asked to, required, asked to sign off my rights to something that is inherently a group responsibility? And I know many of you have made that point from this floor before, but I just wanted to say that from my point of view, the policy resolution 80, Kristen's strongest recommendation was that we not repeal it, and that two things would come from that. One, if we were to decide as a board to say, listen, we don't have enough money and we're only going to do the most in need buildings. She says that's fine as long as the association pays for it ourselves. And that, as an association. And she said that to do to the contrary would require a bylaws amendment, which would be 66 2/3% of the ownership interest. And more likely than not, given the nature of the project, would also require mortgagee sign off. So all the banks and credit unions that collectively own a lot of the percentages of these units. So, it's not impossible to get a resolution to amend the bylaws. It's close to impossible. I think it's only been done, one time or something in the 50 years or something like that, or at least in a long, long time. And it was very difficult to do that back then. But the mortgagee part, to me, renders it from very unlikely to virtually nil. I cannot imagine a situation in which, Wells Fargo is going to say, sure, yeah, why not? I can't imagine that situation. So that being said, that's where she's laid the lay of the land for policy resolution 80. Namely, yes, we can do small numbers of them. No, we can't ask people to pay the portion of it. We shouldn't repeal policy 80 because it makes explicit what in her mind shouldn't need to be made explicit, which is that it is a association responsibility. I just want to note that Mark is online, so we have all 5 members here. So that being said, I want to just open to the board. We're going to have open forum later, so please hold your comments until a little bit later. For the board, we can go in whatever order you want. And if you wanted to talk about Alex Morales and an asset-based line of credit or other things, it's up to you. They all kind of connect together. So it just depends how we want to go. Ginger, do you want to summarize that?
So I talked to Alex. So he's the person I talk to on a monthly basis, that pretty much monthly. When most of our money's in bonds or in CDs or whatever, and they're very safe things. We've made some nice interest in the last year or two. And we typically have 1 or 2 come due each month, and then we set them so that we have 1 or 2 come due 6 or 9 months or whatever. So there's always fresh ones coming up and being renewed. So we were talking strategy, and two big things came from that. One is Morgan Stanley, who he works with, do occasionally have, deals where they'll do line of credit and you'll get, like they have a spring one basically running right now where they're running a special. And you can maybe get a better, interest rate and you can use your existing investments as your, collateral and you can get a line of credit off of that. Kind of like folks do when they do a line of credit off of their mortgage. And I think maybe people have done that. I know I've done some things like that to do a home improvement or something like that. Basically, so they said that's a capability and a possibility. We could do that. But his bigger question to me and something we need to think about is, when do we want to take out the money and how much money do we really take out? And I see some stuff in here for some really large chunks of money and it would be like borrowing it all. And
Yeah.
Alex is like, in a lot of his experience on big projects like this, you might have a front end cost. You maybe help them maybe you pay for the material or you help them make a commitment for the material, but maybe half of it or more, you don't pay until the end. So he's like, don't borrow $5 million today when you don't owe them $1 million or 2 million of it until a year from now or 2 years from now. So he's like, we need to also think about when we need money and how much money we need at different windows. Not meaning to be punny there.
That's funny, that was good.
That was completely unintentional.
There you go. Oh, that's natural, right?
It was a natural pun. But he said that's a really key aspect of this, that we should not be jumping into and assuming that we have to borrow the whole thing, one, at once, and number two, that it's highly unlikely that we would need the whole thing at the beginning, more rather the middle to the end. So that was like another thing that he said, and I was like, that's really makes a lot of sense, and I don't know why, like, it was like, we've all been like, I need to borrow $5 million. Well, maybe we don't need to borrow $5 million. Maybe we need to borrow $1 million now and 3 million later or something, but there's logic. We need to think through that because we can now spread our costs and necessarily pay interest as long as, any more sooner than we have to. So that was another comment that he made, is really look at when you owe it and negotiate with who we're, who we ultimately make a deal with to get those to the best terms that can, if all things are equal and the difference is the payment plan, look at that hard. So that was just the two big things that came out of him, and really from him, like the one thing we can do with Morgan Stanley, and it was his big thing was you could do a line of credit, and that would be a different alternative than the option that I saw in an email today.
Yeah.
So.
That's a very good point. The advantages of a line of credit are the flexibility.
So, okay, that's what I have bring to the table.
Valerie, Mark, or Kyle, any questions so far? Or?
Actually, that answers the question I had earlier. I was asking Melina about all this, and that pretty much makes it very clear for me. And also what you stated with your conversation with John.
John Williams.
John Williams,
Not the
yes.
composer.
Not the composer, yes, not, no Star Wars, yes. That makes a lot of sense to me.
Okay.
I just have a couple of things to say, Alex. I mean, my position has been clear and unchanged for the last, 6 years or so. And I know we just need to get it done. And I know that we need to wait until you really have a draw schedule from the contractor before you really need to borrow anything, because you never know, we might get a sweet deal, or I doubt it, but and I don't know. I think that borrowing money is okay here. And it's not going to be 5 million at one time, like Ginger just said. It might be $1 million a year for 5 years. So you got to look at it that way.
And also based on the email, I think that Melina sent earlier, it would make it more financially reasonable for most people versus just suddenly we're paying out one large assessment every month.
But the net, if I may, we still have to understand. Let's just say it's, you know, we make an arrangement, we sign a deal in June. And they need $1 million in June, and then they need some more money in August or something, and then they need the rest at the end of the contract or something like that, right? They get $1 million to get started, once they order material, we owe them some more money, and then at the end, we owe them the rest. Once we kind of know that, then we go out and we negotiate that with our lenders or whatever, and we figure that out, but July, what I want us to all think about is, we gotta know what's going on before we get into the next cycle of payments by like when our HOA dues go up, right? So we gotta sync this, and we have to time this, and we have to be very thoughtful that we've got to know what is the right amount to cover the investment, if you were, and also, you know, as it relates to the, you know, what the increase would be to the homeowners, so dues. We don't want this to be figured out in September, and then we're like, now what are we gonna do? Because we've told people your HOA dues are gone up by, let's say in a perfect world, 2%.
Yeah.
And then we come back in September and say, oh, psych, I really need 5%. Just for making that discussion. So the speed and urgency that we get quotes, understand what the cycle is gonna be, figure out when we're gonna need to get the money, talk to our banker people and figure out what's the most prudent way to do it and the right time to do it. And then figure out what that would equate to in a monthly cost, and then, you know, to build that into the HOA fees so that we can build it into the July cycle is, to me, the sense of urgency in the middle of March.
Mhm.
So if I can, from a treasurer's perspective, I
Absolutely.
don't know if that's.
We're gonna build it in the budget, like we're meeting
Yeah.
tomorrow. Work on that again.
Sinking.
Next Friday.
Next Friday.
So next Friday?
Yes, sir.
How was
We'll do
that
that.
planned for tomorrow?
I don't know, but I don't have work off tomorrow, but I do next Friday.
I have on my schedule next Friday.
Yeah, I think we're not,
So, I think we've thrown around like lines of credit, borrowing, loan. I mean, we're using a lot of terms. All three of those are different. So I think there's a myriad of way. Are the bids gonna come in with like a payment plan as far as this is how they wanna do it?
Well, that was one of the questions, if we want to put any specific phasing requests. You know, I mean, do we want to say, for example, that they do a phase during the summer and fall, take the winter off because it's inclement, and come back in next summer? And then in that way, we could start to spread things over more than one budget cycle as well, if it were to be over the next July, for example. That's another thing that Kristen mentioned to me was, given the size of the project, it may be inherently phased. They may say, just to start, they might say, okay, we'll do this until November 1st, and then we'll take the winter off because it's nasty. So we can make specific requests about phasing requirements. That was one of the questions. So.
Well, can I say something? I don't.
Sure, Mark.
I don't think that's a good idea. You know, telling them how to phase the project. I mean, because that can then, it just gets you into problems if a contractor wants to cause problems.
Also,
But I mean,
like, I don't like having this time off, and planning factors, it's easier if you just start and go to completion.
and
Um,
if they say they want to take a month off for hot weather, we can say fine, but let's make it, I'm with Mark and Kyle on that. Let's let that be their call. As a contractor, I would prefer to be given, tell me what you want done, and then I'll tell you how to do it, because that's what we do. Then you tell me how to do what I'm supposed to be an expert at. So I think we defer to the experts and we say, how would you do this in a complex this size with this many units, and then they can tell us. And then if they say, hey, there's reasons why we want to take December and January off, we'll be like, got it, understand? You know, we'll go with that.
Okay.
It's just a recommendation.
Unless I hear otherwise, it sounds like that third question we might be edging, does Hallmark anticipate phasing the work? If so, over how many years? Let's just be agnostic about that and say, no, we don't have any particular,
I don't wanna be agnostic. I'd rather say our preference is to start and go to completion. What preference or what schedule do you recommend?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Give us,
I'm with
give
that.
us a schedule of how you would prefer to execute it, along with milestones of payment.
Yeah.
I think the
Yeah,
payment
you-
milestones
you
are
address
probably-
that.
Those are
To me
the
is the
whole
most
ballgame.
important part. Yeah, is the payment milestones. And also the sooner look, what's scaring me right now is the cost of materials.
Mhm.
And the sooner we can get that.
tariffs? You're
not the
tariff head? Tariffs are awesome.
So,
Golden age of
the prices could change by 25% overnight, one way or the other,
Mhm.
depending on what day of the week it is and what people down the street feel. So I'm really concerned if we don't lock in our material costs sooner rather than later, we gotta.
Yeah, I'm almost to the point when if we need to rent like a storage
Yeah.
unit or something to store it all, that's fine.
Yeah,
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 I agree.
I mean, I'm, my biggest fear that the biggest variable here is material costs, and with everybody not knowing the very uncertain environment we are, is very tumultuous, and the sooner we can get a vendor to say, yep, this is what we're gonna charge, and we can lock that in and get that into a payment fee so they can't come back and jam it down our throats later, the better we are.
I agree
So
with
once we
that.
get the bids, we'll be able to identify that better and then. I know people don't like assessments and I'm not saying I like them, but. You know, there's just too many lack of planning in future past decades and we need to start planning for future decades, so. I definitely want to keep assessment on the table. So we had somebody very passionate at the last board meeting. And his number that he got a quote because he was gonna go do it anyway, is not too far off from the assessment number that was on that sheet of paper. It's circulating around. No worky tech issue. So it's not like we're trying to hide it, but I mean, we're talking anywhere from, I think it was 34,000 a month in repayment, all the way up to 56. And that would, go out to where,
But again,
I know it's ballpark, this is all finger paint. We gotta get to paint by numbers and I'm good with that. But I mean, we're also talking.
it's about borrowing the whole amount and not using any of the money that we currently have.
And I had never even thought about doing that.
But look at it this way, no matter what, where do we get our income from? The association, the condo dues, it's not like we're generating money, no matter what, we're paying for this. So sometimes it's better just to bite the bullet and pay for it, or as last week or 2 weeks ago, swallow the bullet. Either way, it just sucks that if you're planning on not being here within the next 10 to 15 years, well, then you just help, but it's gonna help your resale, so. It's a tit for tat, but it gets paid the same way. It's just, do you pay for it up front or do you pay for it all throughout the next 10 to 15 years, depending on what we do?
Right, but some people can't pay it all at once. They need the.
And I think that's where the association has to step in and provide options.
Right,
Okay. Well, those payment options are all still on the table, of course. To round up the other questions, so we're gonna say, I know you've been tracking, Melina, but, we're gonna ask the bidders to, start date through to completion, and then we'll talk about, if we have something we see in the payment schedule, we want to negotiate from there, we can talk about that. So then the next two questions, or the first two questions from Chris at TDL, are both timing, which is, he's saying that he can get bids back, or he will ask the vendors to get bids back by the 24th, pending we get these questions back to him. So the question then becomes, if we get bids back on the 24th, when would we say we would make a decision? And then when from there we want the work to actually start? And that'll also allow us to have these financing conversations in tandem so that we can be armed with the right information. So, would we need a month? I mean, or what do we need? 2 weeks? I mean, we'll have a special meeting if we need to, of course. I think that whenever we get the bids in, I don't think it would be a bad idea if we don't have a special meeting coming up in very short order to notice one, because we just want to jump on it,
So our
Well,
next
we're gonna
board
get-
meeting,
We're
ahead,
gonna
Mark.
we're gonna send the request for proposal. we're gonna get bids back. We're gonna have to negotiate those bids. Okay, till we come to an agreement on both sides. That all takes, say it's 30 days. Okay, to do all that. It's most likely gonna take longer. And by then we know, what to ask the bank for. Mhm. Do we need to borrow money, and at what rate do we need to borrow it? Because, banks understand that, the way construction goes, you get a loan and, you're taking it piece by piece. You have an agreement for 5 million. You might not use all of it. Mhm.
Ginger, yeah.
Again, I just hate that we keep throwing around, we're gonna borrow 5 million on day one. I go back to what I said earlier. The likelihood of us borrowing, but the total value on day one is not a smart thing to do. That we need to be thinking about borrowing or incurring debt incrementally based on the payment milestones. To reduce total cost at the end of the day. But to Mark's point, I do think that there is you receive them, you gotta look at them, you gotta compare them, you gotta go back and ask a few questions. We have this process that we've gotta have public engagement to have any discussions. So even if we met weekly, I don't know that we've got the cycles to meet more than once a week, but even if we met weekly, that would still, that only allows us 4 meetings to negotiate, ask questions, come back and forth, give these guys a chance to ask questions, and then come back and discuss what they said, and then do any follow-up. Hopefully we have a down select out of the 3 and we're down to 2. But that all takes a minute. And we've got to sit and read through all these and then compare and ask questions. And so I agree with Mark, at least a month, given that we have a meeting every week, is like the only way you could do that. I mean, in any other environment, you'd be meeting every day and doing this, and you could maybe get it done a little faster. But but hopefully by then, we also, at the beginning, can know what the payment milestones are, which would give us a good understanding of what kind of money we would need, and hopefully they're within the same ballpark that we could start going down talking to the banks or the whatevers early on in that 1 month process, so that within 45 days, we were like ready to make a commitment to something and would have figured out the banking side of it. In other words, you know that roughly I'm gonna need this much on day 1, I'm gonna need this much roughly on day 60, and I'm gonna need this much roughly in a year or whatever. And so once we know that, then we can go to the bank and figure that out. But if we can figure
Remember
that
that
out.
we have money that's sorry, that's
Yes, I
in the bank.
checked, 4.3 million right now.
Right. So, initially, I think we have enough to cover the initial cost. We could borrow, whatever we need after that, but and then if we want to put
It's the
that
whole
back in
reason
the
why we raised the rates, is so we could do that, right? So I
exactly.
agree with you, Mark.
And
So-
I've watched this project grow by 25%. So I think we just need to say, yes, let's pull the trigger and get it done. And
We did. We got the
We've done
proposals
that.
out there. They're coming back. I think, based off of everything I'm hearing is May, we have to make a decision.
Yeah,
Okay.
And so if we get the bids back on the 24th, TDL, according to Chris's email, they're gonna go do their analysis and provide their recommendation, which is, thank you for going up. Similar to this, of what they recommended we do with the last one. We'll have this, I would imagine, sometime in April.
Mhm.
And then we can make an informed decision in May, and then influence the budget, modify the budget in June, prior to the year starting in July, as far as the financial year.
So I say, 60 days, is that okay then? I mean, if May, so from March 24th to a meeting in May would be what, 45 to 60 days then?
Before you get to celebrate Memorial Day at our pool, we have to have a decision.
Yeah,
Yes.
I think that's reasonable.
I'll write
Okay,
that
so it's
down.
So that's 60, that's around 60 days, right? And then the question of when the work would begin, I mean,
It's based on the bids.
based on the
Based
bids,
on
I
the
mean,
So we
it-
don't- that's, yeah.
yeah, I just, we'll just,
Don't-
that's not,
You're getting in the weeds.
yeah, I
If
don't,
they say they're starting in September, hey, good for you. If they
Yeah.
say they're starting in October, yeah, buddy.
They
Yeah.
gotta order materials and everything else. I mean, they gotta do designs and they gotta go get permits. There's a whole bunch of things that have to happen for most projects.
Yeah.
That before they,
Especially-
they're gonna get stuff awarded, then they do their designs, and then they go get permits, and then they order material and.
Luckily, we've already paid for the design, so we're already done with that,
Okay.
because we've already done 3 units.
but I am definitely in agreement with Kyle on, if we have to dedicate some space and God forbid even lose some parking spots, I know that's touchy too. I mean, if it'll realize significant cost to secure some materials, I think that's more than reasonable, given what Ginger just said. I mean, unless there's a great.
Maybe I'm wrong.
Oh, no, I absolutely think you're right. Unless there's a great aluminum deposit, that's waiting to be found
In America.
I was gonna say in the Gulf of America, perhaps, there would be an aluminum deposit has yet to be found. Anyway, so those seem to be the answers to the questions for Chris. So go forth from there with that timeline that we talked about. I did just want to make sure that we talked at least briefly about the presentation that Hillary sent to us. And we'll get this out there when we get we'll post materials from this. It's just we're having some tech issues as they indicated. Hillary from Leguminorum was good enough to put some numbers together. Again, they were based on really maximal numbers. I mean, I personally had never thought about borrowing the entire amount. My personal view is to pay for half of it with existing reserves and, borrow the rest, but that's a decision to be made. I'd never thought about borrowing $5 million, just for the record from my position. But she did give us some options or some examples of round numbers for 5 and 10-year loans. But kind of the takeaway from it is that she broke down some of the potential costs per unit that ranges from, smallest unit at around 106 for a 15-year loan, $106 extra for 15 years per month for 15 years. That's for the 15-year loan. It'd be about 172 for the smallest unit, going up to in the 300s potentially for the largest unit for the smallest amount of time. And then special assessments, she also talked about that. There are some concerns about that, but it doesn't mean that, people do them, right? It's definitely allowed. Speaking of being allowed, I just wanted, Kristen Buck made it very clear to me that the board does not need any special referendum either to do a special assessment or a loan. She looked at our governing documents to make sure that was the case. So just the 5 members of the board can make that decision by resolution, just so we know we won't get hung up in a different procedural step. And I'm looking at my phone only because I don't have good connectivity on my iPad, so I'm just kind of glancing here. For $5 million, and again, this is the biggest amount, she computed that the smallest smallest unit would pay approximately $15,290, and the largest would pay $33,805. Again, that's for a $5 million number. If you divided that in half, is probably more what I personally have been contemplating. Last point I wanted to make on that, because Ginger's comment made me think of it, which is, and kind of combination of Mark's and Ginger's comments made me think of this, which is given our 4.3 in reserves, I tend to agree with Mark that if we had to put up $1 million or even $1.5 million, very, very early, if not at the outset of the project, I think we could do that directly out of existing reserves and therefore not have to disturb the next fiscal year's budget as much, right? Because we'd be paying from money we already have, as opposed to raising new revenue. Does that make sense, or am I?
It
all
depends
wet?
on when,
It's a lot of variables.
it depends on when the payment schedule, right? So if we got 4.3, we can't go below 1.5 because of Virginia, if I remember correctly, Virginia law or whatever.
Yes, you really only have 2.8.
So say you do 2 and you wanna hold on to 0.8 for other emergencies, we got another boiler
Mhm.
problem, or we got something happened to the elevators or the HVAC or something, right? You're gonna hold on to a little bit of money. And, we've got other projects in the queue too, so, which we talked about at the last board meeting. So, let's just say we do 2. Well, let's say we owe 2 more, let's say it's not gonna be 5, let's say it's only gonna be 4. If, we can't really, this is why we need to know when we owe the money. Like, if, maybe we don't have to borrow it until next February. Let's say they're gonna be done by next February. And we owe them the last payment of 2 mil next February. Well, that's before next
Yeah,
July.
oh, for
So
sure.
we would still have to be prepared
Make the payment.
to start paying for a loan next February. Now, we have time to get the
Yes.
best rate and work that out and plan it and whatever, but we need a budget for February, March, April, May, June, July, or whatever. You get where I'm going?
Yeah,
Like,
absolutely, yes.
So that's what I
If they
mean
come
by-
both, if multiple payments come in 1 year, but that next year, we have to take that into account in
Right,
planning,
so
yes, no question.
even, I agree with you. Hoping we're making the down payment with the 4, using the 2.8 we have available in the bank today. And that we don't have to actually take a loan out for 3, 6, 9, 12 months. It's just knowing when that is based on the payment plan. Then we want to start building that in. To the plan.
I agree.
So I just throw that out there.
Is there anything we can do as far as towing the bids? Like, I'm not, I haven't renovated many places or paid somebody to renovate a place because I can do most of that myself, but how much percentage do we say, hey, we're not paying till the end? Like, can we throw out there a bit of like, hey, you're not getting 30% of the whole cost until the very end? Or I don't know if there's an industry standard. Is it 25? Is it 40? Is it, and I'll look to like anybody who knows anything about that, because I don't.
I don't
Yeah.
either. I mean, Mark might be someone who could talk to this, Mark.
There is a standard for retainage, basically, that you hold from every payment as you go along. I mean, they're going to be billing you on a monthly basis. For every invoice, every bill that they send in, okay, you can hold, say, 10% of that. That's, what I'm seeing these days. It's 5 to 10%. So that's what your retainage is, throughout the life of the project.
Yeah, that sucks.
Yeah, it's not that it's not on your side at all to wait.
No, not saying that. I'm saying that we don't have a PM to run this project. So that's like a PM, like now Melina's job has now just become windows and doors, which that's not.
No,
I'm
that's
not understanding why there's monthly payments.
Yeah, it
That
should be
makes no
milestone
sense to me.
payments.
It should be milestone payments. You get a payment when the design or the permits are pulled, you get a payment at ordering the material, you get a payment,
Start work.
start work or
And
complete work or
percentage.
something like that.
So you are invoiced by that, as you say. So you get an administrative invoice, it would outline what the task is, what they did. It could be permits, meetings is on that invoice. When you start into the project, that's when you have bi-weekly meetings possibly, and we talk about, or we talk about that invoice. If you have a question. So it's determined by the phase what you guys are willing to pay for each phase, or how that project gonna be structured, whether it's gonna be tier or floors, however.
Okay.
But they'll invoice you. And typically what I do is keep track of that unit. The payments, where the contractors are, so that when we have meetings, we can discuss any change orders, any questions or concerns they have. You will have possibly a change order that you have to review in between the project.
Yeah, change order.
Yeah, so that would adjust the cost that's due at that time and Chris would be better to explain that far as, because what he does, he reviews usually the engineer reviews the invoicing from the contractor. Then he summarizes it and submits it to the property for payment. So if you have any questions or concerns about that invoice, that's the time to say, hey, I have a problem with it. Why, if you weren't aware of a change order, you can discuss it, or you need a breakdown of that change order, then you discuss it at that time. But typically what they do is they let us know during meetings, the change orders, then it's addressed in the meeting minutes, and everybody knows as far as the community, what those changes are and so forth. Everyone is updated.
Can we,
I'm still getting away, we're not doing monthly invoices, like that makes no sense to me.
From the
And
contractor,
one thing, Ginger, understand that the contractor, they have a bunch of laborers to pay. They have, their internal staff to pay. They bill you on a monthly basis. I mean,
Okay, that's
they're
fine.
just
I'm-
standard.
I'm sorry, I'm new to the group, but I've been a construction accountant for, but
Who's
commercial,
this?
I'm sorry, this is Peggy Sternweiss. I'm just a member, an owner, but
Oh, I'm sorry, we're just not yet an open forum. If you can just hold on for a minute, we're gonna get there soon.
I was just gonna give you some information about how commercial construction works. And
Yeah, if you just
typically,
if you could just hold on to that just for a couple minutes, we're gonna get to
Okay.
open forum very soon. So as far as the payment, the milestone versus the money, that's something when we see a bid, we can go back and we can talk about payment milestones and make it to our satisfaction at that point.
That's fine.
Uh, Something that came up in my conversation with Kristen, and I'll close for me here is, obviously there are risks in this, and to the point of depleting the reserves too low. The biggest risk that I've seen enunciated to me is, what happens when they start digging in and they see things that we didn't anticipate or that we didn't see in our test units. That's something that to me argues caution in terms of how much we draw down on our 2.8 of available reserves, because these change orders are not they don't tend to go in our direction. And they tend to go pretty high in the other direction sometimes. So this is something for risk management to keep in mind. Before we get to open forum, or any board members that haven't had a chance to say something that you
Yeah, I just
want to get a
wanna-
chance, Kyle?
can we make sure we lock on Chris for the May board meeting whenever we're gonna make the decision here, he's here to actually answer questions face to face, hear people's concerns in real time, and we all go into this with our eyes wide open.
This is Chris from TDL.
Chris Kelly from the TDO. All right, so, ma'am, I'm sorry I didn't catch your name the first time, but if you want to just restate, you can go first here in open forum.
I apologize for the interruption. I was
No
just
problem.
going to say that I've been working in the construction industry for about 35 years. And typically with a commercial construction company, they ask for, the first money they ask for is a deposit for the materials. And after that, it's a draw schedule based on the completion of the project. So wherever they are in the project, they would put forward a projected draw schedule and then bill monthly for what they've completed. And then there is a retainage factor.
Okay. Thank you for that. Appreciate it.
Please come to the May meeting.
We have Bob, you're recognized.
Yeah, Tom, I want to ask you, all these numbers and things you're shooting back and forth. I don't remember hearing anybody say, unless I missed it, is this project going to be every window in the building or another project? Because in the past meetings, you've been saying, well, should we do it this way? Should we do it that way? Should we let the people that need it get it and leave the others alone that don't need it? you've decided, and it's chiseled in stone, that everything you're talking about is now positively going to involve every window in the building. Is that correct?
I can say that I understand that that has been what is advised from many experts. That is my view. I do get the sense, is there anybody that doesn't feel that way on the board, that we should piecemeal this? I don't think so.
I'm not looking for a piecemeal, but also we gotta see the bids. And we gotta make sure we can make it make sense, and then that's what I'd say right now, it's carved in, rich mahogany.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't think we made a decision that it's, all or partial. I think that we would all like it to be the whole building. But when the bids come in, that
Yeah.
could change. So, gotta be flexible.
Yeah, I think probably the most comprehensive answer would be, if we are indeed talking about the sorts of numbers that are being bandied about, anywhere between, high threes to mid fours, million, then it seems like most of us would say, okay, let's, we would like to go forward with all the windows. I mean, of course, if it comes back, $7 million or something, then obviously we have to take a radically different view of the situation. But I would say we're inclined to do them all, pending the actual numbers.
And please understand, you have to have that timeline for legal to review those contracts as well.
For sure. Barbara.
Just a couple of additional variables that maybe you want to think about. A special assessment typically in our jurisdiction is the responsibility of a seller to pay. So if it's listed as a special assessment, let's say there's $5,000 special assessment, just to put it out there. It's contractually specified, and of course you can always negotiate the contract, but it is contractually specified that that's the seller's net to pay. So there are ramifications to doing it that way. Another thing that I wanted to toss out too is, and I remember having almost these verbatim conversations with Alex back when I was on the board, because of course we discussed all of this, and to that point, a couple of things. It's disruptive to the process to take the amount of time that's being taken for a lot of reasons, but one of them is continuity of our board members, because every year someone is subject to elections, and typically it's 2 positions each year. I think 2 years it's 2 positions, and 1 year it's 1 position. So that's something to consider as well, because that's disruptive to the process. And then the third point that I want to make is, in terms of a loan, prognostications are always real tricky, but Alex is pretty good. And you may want to get some other people thinking about it too. One of the questions to consider is, might money be less expensive in the upcoming years than it is right now? Just thinking about economic issues.
Yes, indeed. Thank you for all that. Yes, Jen.
I just forwarded to you a copy of a project manager's report, who are Florida Condo had routine to provide oversight over a major structural renovation project, which relieved the board of the responsibility of necessarily reviewing invoices to determine whether the work was done, whether it was done properly, whether it was done to meet code, whether the materials that were proposed were being used. So I thought that you can share it with the rest of the board members.
By all means, thank you. Susan, I'll get to you in 1 second. I just want to piggyback on that, which is just for historical reference. A year and a half ago, when Pat was with us, he had mentioned the idea that potentially to relieve some of the stress on the general manager, that we would build into our cost considerations additional backup support for the general. So if, for example, Melina is devoting a ton of her time to overseeing the part of the building project, part of the window project, maybe our temporary I can't remember her name, Sheila, maybe Sheila, would be called upon to cover sometimes to relieve some stress, obviously that costs money. But
We
it
had
just
that
made me
built-
think about it.
We had that built in the budget. The other thing I threw out a year and a half ago, maybe, I don't know, Pat piggybacked on it or something was, let's go hire our own PM. You know, go get somebody who's studying engineering and freaking VT or whatever, and freaking say, hey, you want a job out of college and 1099 them. We're not giving you any benefits, but we'll give you a salary and you get some experience. And this is a pretty, I don't want to say straightforward, nothing straightforward in contract, especially or construction, especially in freaking this kind of construction, but it's not like building something from scratch. But it's not fair to the current staff to have to manage everything, and it's an unfair expectation that we're gonna get everything we pay for if that's our plan.
Yeah, just day-to-day building services, we all rely on, Lena Deuce. Sorry for the interruption, Susan.
Yeah, I just wanted to verify the scope. When this gentleman was mentioning, are you talking all the windows? The scope of the project includes window replacement, balcony door replacement, and repairing the brick, the leaks and everything, correct?
All of the above.
Okay.
Yes, that's
I just wanted to
why
Be sure we were still.
windows, patios, mounting, the actual,
Yeah, the
the flashing, the attendant masonry work, that's all part of
But
this.
also common windows.
Yes, every single window, even the ones that are truly common as opposed to limited common,
Yeah, like
elements.
the ones in the elevator lobbies. and
Yes,
stuff.
all of
Yeah.
those.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just wanted to verify and be sure it hadn't been narrowed down.
No, indeed. Thank you for that. Yes.
And so you mentioned that it might be that not all of the windows or the units would be provided with new windows and whatever is included in the scope. If that happens, would those units still be responsible, those owners still be responsible for the fees incurred per month? Or would they be waived for those units?
Oh.
Because if that's the case, then I feel that should be provided, the new unit should be.
Sure, so
Every effort should be made to do that.
sure, if I misspoke in my response to Bob, I apologize. It is our decided preference that if we can get a reasonable bid, that we're gonna do all the windows, regardless of if they're in pretty good condition or terrible condition, and that everybody would, whether it's through the loan or through an assessment, would share based on their ownership interest, the cost of that, so that we don't anticipate, again, if we get a, $10 million bid, we're gonna be back to the drawing board and start having all kinds of conversations. But if we're in the ballpark of what we're talking about, it would be all of them.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, no worries. Anybody online has a question? We have a couple more at 7:55. I'd like to adjourn by 8, if possible.
Yeah, just for a little ease of comfort, the previous bids, if we went with the one that we were leaning towards going to the last time, you added 8%, which is what Chris has recommended as far as, he bumped up to 10 now. Oh, then never mind, my numbers are gonna be off, but we're not breaking 4 mil yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's okay. So a little bit.
10 might get us close to 4 mil now.
Alex, and then see if there's anybody in, online that wants stuff. Yes.
It looks like based on the presentation that was being circulated, most of the rates we're looking at right now are somewhere around 6 months and change. Can the board give us an indication of what rate of return we're receiving right now on savings? Is it close to that? Is it substantially less?
Right now, it's gotten, let's see, last week, we got I think we did a 3-month and a 6-month CD, because we try to keep it so that we stagger them, and so that we have a constant rotation. They call it laddering, but anyway, so that there's always something coming due every month. We did a 3-month and a 6-month, at 4.6.
So it's roughly a 1.5% difference.
Yep,
Okay.
today.
Next
today.
month, it could be a completely different number.
But I've also heard, and maybe the folks that do this, they're in that world, that, both rates are, can go up or go down, right? So, and they tend to kind of go down and go up kind of at a similar ratio. So, I don't think we're going to get more than, it's always gonna be in the, you know, and that kind of in a negative deficit for the amount you're gonna make in interest is gonna be a lesser rate than the amount that you're gonna pay in interest. So I don't think it's gonna, that's a normal phenomenon. So I don't think that phenomenon is gonna change on our behalf. But
That's right.
if I mean, we've made a lot of money, a lot more than was actually forecasted and budgeted, so that's a good thing, right? Over the last few years. But I swear, and Val, Barbara, I heard that, you know, the rates are coming down. So if the rates are coming down, that means that the loan rates are down. Now, the interest we're making isn't going up, but I'm happy if the loan rates are going down. Like, that's okay, I'm okay with that, right? So maybe it's not 6.9 this summer by the time we have to borrow. Maybe it's only 5.9. And that's a significant difference at the amount of money we're borrowing. So,
All this is tied to like the Fed's monetary policy.
absolutely,
So-
just like everybody else, like if you were borrowing for a car, or you're borrowing for a house, or us borrowing for windows. We're all going off
You can
this.
talk us to death. I mean, until we get the bids in front of us this time again, we don't know.
I think my point is, I don't really see a benefit to us as a community to pay more money in interest than what we're receiving as far as interest on funds that we have available. Absent us knowing that we're going to need additional funds available and that we may have difficulty borrowing money.
Yeah, I
There's an
mean,
election coming up. Just saying.
I think one thing that is probably gonna be constant is the difference we're talking about, because as Barbara mentioned, I mean, it's like going to a casino, right? I mean, the house is always gonna make a little bit of money, and that delta is, you know, kind of what's gonna go to the bank. But to your point, make it as low as possible, right? And that's where you can shop
We're trying
around.
to do,
That's
right?
why you shop around, and banks that do better at that will get better business, and those that aren't, no. We'll take 2 questions online, and then we'll call it a night.
Sonia, you want to go ahead with your question?
Sure. First of all, thank you for conducting this additional meeting on this pressing issue. It's been especially pressing for me because my windows face north and my apartment is uncomfortably cold in the winter. So I understand that the ideal case would be if the windows of the whole building get replaced. But in case we decide to go on with partial replacement, how would you prioritize which windows would be replaced? Have you ever thought about that?
Yeah.
My windows are not leaking or anything, but it's very cold, they're drafty.
No, you raise a good point, and in fact, one of the more problematic things about doing a partial solution, which is we have data from when Chris from TDL came and took an inventory of the windows and their general state, but you know, ultimately that would be, you know, a discretionary call on the part of the board, and it's like, you know, how bad is bad enough to justify replacing a window is one of the things that's problematic about doing a less than total solution, because there's always going to be someone who's right at the cusp who says, hey, it's really bad for me, but you didn't decide to approve my window, you know, why or why not? So it's a perfectly legitimate thing. I don't have an answer. I don't know that there is an answer to that, other than that it would have to be some sort of fair system would have to be derived, so that we, you know, can be, you know, fair and honest and transparent about how the decision would be made. But hopefully we don't need to cross that bridge.
Yeah, like a lottery system for education in DC. Hopefully, what we can do is do this the same way as, in an ideal world, we know the tiers that are bad, and we start with the bad tiers and do the entire building.
Absolutely.
I have Sarah.
All right, last question goes to Sarah.
Hey,
Sarah who?
Sarah Ramsey from 402. I just want to confirm, stating up front that I know we don't have final answers now, but the intention is that however we come up with the money for this, whether it's a loan or a special assessment or something, that each owner, each unit will be responsible for a portion of the cost over and above our normal monthly condo fee.
Well, the key word there is over and above, so I want to parse that out. I mean, if it were a special assessment for a lump sum, absolutely clearly that it would be in correspondence to your percentage of ownership and everybody would pay, the pro rata there. And again, to kind of go back to the top of the meeting, the reason for that is that we all own the windows in common together. Even though only one unit uses them, that's why it's a limited common element. So since they're commonly owned, they have to be commonly upkept and commonly replaced. And so yes, it would be a distributed cost amongst the entire. In terms of above and beyond, well, that depends on how the budget interplay with what Ginger was talking about before. I mean, it kind of depends on the payment schedule and how it interplays with fiscal year timings. And so, I can't really say for sure that until we know whether things are jumbled up in one year or if they're spread out over more than one.
Highly probable
Yeah, it's
that in
still-
addition to whatever normal 2%, whatever 3% we would normally increase due to just cost of business, of the,
Cost of life.
cost of life, right? That there will be some chunk added to the monthly payments that is to pay the interest or the
Right.
whatever that's gonna pay for this. Just like a year or so, 2 years ago, when out of the blue, our insurance went up because of
Fire.
just the fire that had happened and that, and insurance is going up for everybody nationwide. And so our, rates went up and more than what we anticipated. Yes.
I'm
rates
just,
will go up.
I guess I wasn't sure if the decision had been made or not. To me, there's a big difference between adding to the monthly condo fee and then asking people to pay 13 or 15 or 20 or 25,000
Yes.
in a lump sum as a special assessment. And like I said, I totally understand that we don't know until we know what the cost is, but it sounds like we don't even know what path we would go down yet. So thank you. I just wanted to confirm.
Yes, yeah.
I think we have a preference.
Yeah, so Sarah, to your point, your answer to your question is very simply yes and yes, right?
Yeah.
Because the other thing we have to do, we have to forecast for is all these other major things that are coming on that we're gonna have to do in the next decade. And we need to start budgeting for those and planning for those and saving for those now, vice all of a sudden throwing out high percentage points just a few years before it has to happen like we've done with this project. So yes and yes is the answer. What's the least amount of pain? That's the way we're gonna have to figure out once we get the bids in.
One thing I wanted to throw out there, also just because I noticed it from the presentation is, if there were a loan payment that, we determined, it seemed from Hillary's presentation that there would be a way to add that to the monthly fees, but not necessarily have that add to the compounding
That's fenced off.
base, have it fence off and sort of like, part one being your normal fee and part two being your loan contribution fee. So that way, when future years come up, the compounding, the compound interest, for lack of a better term, would be excluding those short-term payments, which would be a little bit easier to swallow. Because that it wouldn't be building on, compound and, double over time. I was gonna close it off, but if we can have very concise, last comments, Hank and then Barbara, then that's the end of it.
I just wanted to clarify if you have an assessment, then you're paying today for the entire cost.
Right.
And so.
And there would
if
be,
you move
right.
out of the building tomorrow, you still will have paid whatever that.
Absolutely.
If you do it as part of the monthly fees, obviously you're only paying for the portion of the time that you're living in the condo. So, I'm personally, in favor of having it added to the condo fees. Because I don't think it's fair we have a lot of senior people in the building who probably may not be here in 15, 20 years when this gets paid off. So really, I think it makes more sense to have it paid when people are actually living in the building.
And Barbara, the very last.
I don't know that anyone will have the answer to this, but it might just be worth finding out, because a client asked me about it and I had never really even thought about it. And that is the ability to write off capital expenditure, the portion of each individual unit's capital expenditure costs for the condo when they sell, to be able to recapture that, which might at least help people when they come to sell, just as, you know, a fee simple homeowner might do. And maybe, I don't even know who the right person is to provide that, because it's a tax.
Yes, a tax.
accounting question.
Maybe ask our CPA.
But, maybe
Okay.
something interesting to pursue,
Yeah.
to potentially soften.
Yeah, soften the blow.
The blow.
Okay. All right, thank you.
But I wanted to say that for to keep away suits, to make sure, I think it's called a statement of disclosure, a disclosure statement, where it's a part of the resale packet. And it can provide an option for a portion that if the buyer wants to pay a portion, because, you know, people like, I really want to be here, they may be willing to pay that. But that's something legal would have to write up and definitely have that in a resale, because if someone moves here and they say, assessment, no one told me that, that would keep the community from being sued.
True. All right, unless any board members feel we need anything in executive session, I think we pretty much aired things. I don't think there's anything particularly private to go through tonight. So thank you, everybody, for on the community forum for your thoughts and contributions. And thank you, everybody, for coming. And we will go forth. We're going to clarify things with Chris from TDL. And so, you know, the next thing that we're all waiting for are the actual bids. And that's going to be really the next big action step, is to see what the numbers come out with, what the payment schedules, et cetera, et cetera. So stay tuned, and we're moving forward on multiple fronts, and the meeting is adjourned at 8:08
Thank you,
PM.
John, for joining us.
Thank you.
Good meeting, guys.
Take the
Hey,
donuts.
Tom, this is Mark. When do we expect the bids to come?